Measuring Evil, Britain's Worst Killers is one of the most exciting, thrilling, nail-biting documentaries I've ever seen. It's a very short documentary. It's a 3-part true crime series, but the length of it actually helps to make it work even better. And I will explain that in a moment, but I'm not going to give any spoilers, and I think that's very important given the approach that this documentary takes. I watched this on Amazon Prime as part of the Crime and Investigation channel. It was originally released in 2015, and it's presented by Professor David Wilson, who has written numerous books and is exceptionally knowledgeable about his field, and I had a lot of trust in what he was saying. So this documentary, as I said, it's only 3 episodes, each one about 45 minutes long, and Professor Wilson takes 3 episodes to count down the 20 most notorious killers in Britain. These are in his opinion. So I was first of all curious to know how his opinion would differ to mine. But he's not just picking names at random. He has a formula for working out how bad these serial killers are. For example, the victims have to be vulnerable, they have to be on a killing spree and uncaught for a certain length of time. And with each of those, he starts with number 20. And I was in 2 minds about discussing some of the names mentioned, but I don't want to, because for me, that was the biggest thrill. But he starts at 20, and roughly the first episode is maybe the first 10, or maybe first 10 cases, the second episode's the next 5, and then the last episode is the penultimate 5, 4, 3, 2, and then the big one. So that's maybe not exact, but why I like this is because I was just desperate to see who he was going to pick next. I mean, ultimately, I was very keen to see who he'd put at number 1. But even when you're picking just 20, unfortunately, there have been many, many serial killers in Britain over the years. Some of them are, to maybe want for a better word, quite boring, where they will just kill a couple of people over a couple of days. They'll be imprisoned quickly, and they don't really go down in history. But some of them are notorious. And I'm a seasoned true crime watcher and reader, and I write crime fiction, so I spend a lot of my time reading about true crime. And I thought, how many of these will I not have heard of? And out of the 20, I think there were maybe 3 that I hadn't heard of. And I'd say there were a good 6 or 7 that I'd only recently heard of because of other documentaries I'd watched on Crime and Investigation. So certainly a lot of these are lesser known. And that's not to say they're not known at all. You may have heard of them, but if you're not a true crime addict, a lot of these are not going to be the big names that are, well, household names still. So I think there's a lot to learn. And each one, some of them are different lengths. For example, certainly the last one, the number 1, took about half an episode. Some of them are brushed over relatively quickly, but each one gives us reconstructions, clips of archival news footage at the time. Where possible, we have clips of interviews with the killers, audio of the killers, talk with victims. It's a full package, and each one kind of feels like its own mini documentary about that serial killer. And that is particularly interesting because it treats them all in the same way, but at the same time, it has a different flavour for each one. There are certain serial killers in here about whom we know significantly more than others. And yet I felt like each one was given the same time and attention needed. And it's all done sensitively, but it's also done very fascinatingly. It's not overly gruesome. There are some close-ups of weapons and things like that. But off the top of my head, I can't remember there being any kind of close-ups of dead bodies or wounds or anything like that. So if you're a bit squeamish, I think you'll be okay with them. But it's not so bland that it's boring. It really is thoroughly gripping. And I would absolutely love to sit and say, I loved learning about this person, I loved the way they treated this person. But I refuse. I absolutely refuse to do that because that's what makes this so great. The other thing that makes this amazing, if you're a true crime fan already, is that Professor Wilson starts off each number by telling us about the crime, describing it, before giving the name. And that's great, because as they're describing it, my brain is going, who is this? I know this, I recognise this crime, I recognise the MO. And then, hopefully, 9 times out of 10, the name would come to me before he said them. And in the occasions where they didn't, I kicked myself, apart from, as I said, those few where I just hadn't heard of them. Obviously, a lot of time and effort and research has gone into this. It is one of my favourite documentaries, mainly because of how unique it is and how involved it is. I feel like I'm part of it when I'm watching it, trying to play this serial killer guessing game. It's kind of like Guess Who of murderers. Did your killer use a knife? It's in the probably sickest way. It's a lot of fun. Definitely worth watching. It'll take less than 3 hours to watch all 3 episodes. I watched 2 in one sitting, and then I was brave and I kept the last episode until the next day, and completely worth. It's definitely worth watching. I think you'll thoroughly enjoy it. The reconstructions are pretty decent. There was nothing in it, in the cases where I was already familiar with the situation, that I thought was false or incorrect or misleading. Everything that I understood previously was relayed in the same factual way, pretty unbiased, which is great. And honestly, I definitely recommend you watch it. It's not very long, but where it lacks in quantity, it certainly makes up for it in quality.